will get started here. And this time we're going to talk about code reviews. We have mentioned code reviews a couple of times, and also static analysis tools. And so those are going to come into play as part of this presentation. But we've talked about code reviews as in, hey, they're good things. They're nice to have. This is a little bit more about how to do them and thinking about making them a part of your life, basically, a part of your processes, because there definitely is a value to it. And so we'll start with just sort of what is a code review, what entails actual code reviews, where you have to think about them, put a little bit of a definition around it. And we're going to talk about the benefits of code reviews. There's also costs. You can think pros and cons, but there's definitely an investment essentially that you're making into your code, your organization. When you're and it's your organization more than even your code. When you do code reviews, we're going to talk about some points, some places where it makes sense to do a code review, and sort of how to factor that into your processes, particularly if you have very well-defined, like CI/CD, things like that have sometimes even automated processes built into your whole flow from writing code to deploying out to production. And then we're going to talk a little bit about building habits, making it something that it's something that you're not only comfortable with, but it just becomes it's very natural to your process, whether it is an organization or it is a personal kind of code review, whatever that would be. It's not so much a culture there, but a code review attitude, we'll say. So first, what's a code review? I'm going to go with the definition. I'll sort of, chicken out a little bit on this one. So from DZone, Developer Zone, quick shameless plug for them. If you want to learn stuff about anything technical, basically, check out DZone. They've got all kinds of downloadable little flyers and ebooks. They have all kinds of articles. They cover lots of technology stuff. It's a great source for just keeping up with what's going on. So from them, definition: code review is a systematic examination of software source code intended to find bugs and estimate the code quality. Slightly reworded, it's a process where source code's peer reviewed. Your goal really is to address bugs, standards, really maintain standards, and overall quality. And this also, as I'll bring up a little bit through this presentation, is a short-sighted. I see this as a little bit short-sighted as a view of what a code review is, because while code reviews are, by the name itself, focused on code, I think that there is a lot that comes out of code reviews that actually has to do with the developers and your development shop, your software development processes, that is probably even more valuable than the code review process itself. So code review points, which is basically, okay, if I want to do a code review, and going back here, just looking at the most basic, we're going to do systematic examination of software source code. Basically, we're looking for bugs, trying to make sure that we're following standards and making sure that we're matching a certain quality. So there's different places that make sense, or that I guess it's an option to do a code review. You can do it on a commit. So as soon as somebody commits code, you can have something that says, hey, it needs to be reviewed. We need to go through a code review process. You can do it before deployment. So you can say, before we deploy to, and deployment may not be, we're not talking necessarily production deployment. So this could be, for example, let's say we do weekly deploys to a QA staging server, something along those lines. Then maybe that's part of it, is that before you do that deployment, part of the process is we're going to do a code review. And this may either, stop the deployment, or may be something that we put on our backlog to address before the next deployment. It may be part of a release. So your release process, particularly if you're thinking of sprints, that can be a really good way to do it, is that as you get towards the end of the sprint where you're into that this is what we're going to put in this sprint. This is going to be released. You're doing your sprint review. Maybe that part of that is you have a code review as well, that you go through it and say, hey, we're going to look at everything that we've done for this release. It's slightly same, but slightly different in its placing, is you can do it as part of a retrospective. So it could be something that you've already deployed, you've released it to some extent, but now you're going back and looking at what you did, and you're actually taking a closer look at the code itself. And then you may do it with all of these, regardless of the time points. It can be done individually. You may have certain individuals do a code review. You may have a team that gathers and has some sort of a team meeting or something along those lines, whether it's virtual or in person. There are plenty of ways that you can look at it, and you do get slightly different costs and benefits on whether you have like individuals just sort of check code and they just by themselves do a code review, versus having that communication, that meeting kinds of an approach where you have multiple people involved and they're together doing the code review. And you can do it much like any other meeting, where there may be like a pre-meeting kind of thing, or essentially you can send out the code, effectively setting an agenda. You can send the code out, let everybody review it beforehand, and maybe even send some comments in so that your meeting is focused on the feedback, and you're not necessarily going through the work of a code review during that meeting, but instead you're going through the communication and the discussion of that code. Because code reviews are not always going to be black and white. It's like a lot of things where there are some gray areas in there where you may say, it may even be open-ended questions. Is this the best way to do this? Does this follow our standards the way we want it to? So timing and your approach can be a big factor in whether a code review, how useful it is, and whether it's even going to be something that you can maintain and turn into a habit as an organization or even as an individual developer. So sort of laid the groundwork that there's this thing out there. And I really want to talk, get a little bit more now into the benefits of why would you do this? Because even thinking about it already, you know that, all right, we're spending some time, we're looking at code that's already been written. Maybe it's already been deployed. And we've got resources that we're now spending their time over here on this code review thing when they could be on this new development thing or fixing bugs. So why would you even care to do a code review? Particularly if you think it's like, hey, that source has been released, so there may not be any use in us doing that. Well, there are some benefits. One, and I'll start sort of in the middle on this one, actually. Reducing bugs is sort of the obvious one. There are bugs and I think we all know, there are bugs that you can release that may not appear except in certain cases. They could be like outlier bugs and things like that. They may also be things that only trigger at certain times. Like there's race conditions that you'll run into where everything runs fine until you happen to have task A and task B run at close enough the same time window that they lock each other or block each other or cause each other to break. And there's also some state kinds of things that we can run into where the only way you're going to see that bug is if you're in a certain state. And sometimes if you haven't run into this, you'll realize that if you look at the code, that thing will jump out at you. As you look at the code, you'll say, hey, there's a gap here, or here's a check that we're not making. Particularly like in code, it may be something where, like, for example, you have a try catch, and the catch part of it, when you catch the exception, it's not doing anything. So all it's doing effectively is just hiding the exception. You just say, oh, I'm going to try this. And if you don't have it do anything when it catches an exception, then you can essentially swallow the exception. Sometimes that's needed, or that's part of your design, but a lot of times that's not, and technically probably should not be. As if there's an exception, something somewhere should be noted so that you can handle that exception properly. There should be some sort of handling and some sort of clean addressing of that situation. So reducing bugs, even if the code's already gone out, it could go through QA, but you will still there'll be cases and instances where a code review will actually surface bugs that were not found otherwise. Along with that, that becomes, and it's a bigger picture than just bugs, but improving code quality. Because there are things that you can do. You can code stuff that is not going to generate a bug, but is going to be potentially not scalable. Easily, we all know, really nasty spaghetti code or stuff that's not documented, or the naming standards are ridiculously bad, where the maintenance is a nightmare. You can have stuff where the logic flow is so convoluted that not only is it hard to maintain, but it also ends up being not scalable. There's a certain point where you realize that if you call that enough times, or if you try to push enough data through it, it breaks. It chokes. It brings the system to its knees. So it's improving code quality, and not just through bugs, but all of the other things that we want good code to do, which makes it, it's readable, it's maintainable, it's scalable, it's stable. Those are things that you're going to find. You can get those things out of a code review. Those kinds of things can be surfaced and then addressed. I talked about there being more to a code review than the code itself. And so one of those is cross-training of the team. When you have other developers looking at your code, regardless of how the team is organized, that means that those other developers get an insight into your code, into what you were working on. And you might be working side by side with somebody and working on roughly the same functions or methods or pieces of code. But if you don't do it, then it's something that could be a blind spot to you. And when you're doing code reviews, you're bringing the team together to say, all right, let's all take a look at this and see what we're doing. And so you can see not only what they're doing also, but actually sort of how they think. And while yes, some people can be personally attached to their code and feel, we'll say, slighted if somebody points out a bug or an improvement or something like that. I think, if you do it right, then you're gonna pull the team together instead of break them apart. And if somebody wants to point at them like, hey, you had 6 bugs, I only had 3, or something like that, then to be flippant, you smack them upside the head and say, no, that's not how this works. That's not what this is. That's not what we're trying to do. But no, to be more seriously about it, is you can build a team culture, because then you get done right. It's, hey, we're all working together. So it's not that you wrote code that had a bug in it or something like that. It's that, hey, here's the direction we want to go. And here's another set of eyes to help you, remind you that, hey, here's something that we do. Or as a team to discuss code quality to a level of, hey, you've got a solution and we're looking at that as a team. And maybe we can, as a team, come up with a better solution, or we can review some of the other options that are out there. And it educates all of us on that process, on that problem solving process, and how we got to that solution. Because code review sometimes is not just pointing out, hey, this needs to change. Sometimes it's a conversation that, hey, you did this. I want to understand your thought process, or why did you need to do it that way? I thought it would be simpler, and you have this more complicated thing. And this sort of goes also back to the cross training, where you may say, yeah, I did it this way. And it may seem sort of odd, but it's because I found that we have A, B, and C requirements that require us essentially to do code this way. And it may even go to the most famous and nasty of things that you'll find occasionally, where you'll have a comment even in a code that says, this line doesn't really do anything, but I have to have it or else the code breaks and I can't figure out why. And I think we've all run up against those at some point, and code reviews can surface those things. Sometimes it'll be somebody else can actually say, oh, this is why you have to do that. Or it at least notifies everybody that, oh yeah, it's like, this is a critical piece of code, even though it doesn't look like it. So please don't touch it. It goes back to a old Simpsons episode where the neighborhood gets together to build a house, and there's a poster on one of the children's bedrooms, and kid doesn't like it and is about to take it down. I'm like, oh, no, don't take that poster down. It's a load bearing poster, which, and an architectural joke would be, is pretty amusing in itself. But we have that in code. I think we've all had those moments where we realize that this doesn't make sense, that I need to do this, but I need to, because if I take this out, everything breaks. But if I leave it in, it works. Now, probably there is something that, there's probably something more to it, but sometimes that's all we can find at the point, and we get to move on. And so the last point too is that I think the more you discuss your code in a team environment where everybody's pulling towards, let's be better as a team. We talk about building better developers. This is building a better development team, a better development environment, a better development culture. That building that up, spending that time helps you remove your personal attachment to your code. There's still that pride and work ethic, I think, that goes into it, where you say, hey, I'm going to strive to go into a code review and do things in a way that checks all the boxes off and is something that people say, hey, this is, this follows our standards. But in doing so, I think if you do it in the right environment, it pushes you to do that without you feeling like it's a personal attack if you didn't. And it makes it that much easier for you to throw your code out there and say, hey, take a look at this. Do you have, I think this works. Do you have some suggestions on how it can be better? Because that's going to be key to getting better, is not doing the same thing that you want to do, but getting other people to take a look at it and point out where you can make improvements. If you write code perfect the first time, you will never get better. Technically, there'd be no need. If you write 100% perfect code, there is no better, but nobody does that. So there's always going to be a better. And the sooner that we remove, we'll say, almost the stigma in our own mind of us not being at 100%, the sooner we're going to be able to improve.